I ran 3 separate tests on 8 different woodworking glues to see, well, primarily to see which of these has the best working time, and I got some unexpected results. So I started to have some questions about glue recently, and more and more questions came up, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to test these glues myself. And the first test that I'm doing on this video is I'm getting at the open or working time of the different glues. Now I decided to test only PVA glues for this test, polyvinyl acetate, the more common wood glues. I'm not testing epoxy, I'm not testing polyurethane, the super glue type of stuff. I'm not testing hide glue. And I'm also not testing for strength. I'm not comparing the relative strength between any of these because Fine Woodworking already did an article on that, and they did a nice job. Also, the basic result is that all of these glues are more than strong enough. All of the PVA glues are more than strong enough. In fact, they're some of the strongest glues you can have. So there's no point in comparing the relative strength between these because it's been done and it's not a concern. So how did I conduct these tests? Well, first of all, this is not a scientific test. I'm not a scientist. This isn't a laboratory. This is my shop in the basement of my house. I did the best I could, and I'm interested in real-world results, so I did what I could to try to get have the test reflect, real-world use of the glues. The way I selected the particular glues that I chose is the Elmer's here. This is one that's been my go-to woodworking glue for several years, and so one I mostly use. I wanted to test that. The tight bond glues, they're extremely popular, and so I wanted to test them. Okay, I'm going to interrupt for just a second. What I mean by tight bond is I tested the original Tight Bond 2, and Tight Bond 3. And I'm also interested in how these different glues will work with veneers. So I selected Better Bond veneer glue. Well, first let me back up. These 3 veneer glues can all be used for regular joinery too. So anyway, I selected Better Bond, Tight Bond Cold Press, and Unibond 1. Now Unibond has a Unibond 800, 8000, their resin glue. This is not that. This is a PVA glue. It's a new glue that they've come out recently, and I want to see how it compares. I forgot to mention that I also tested Pro Glue, which is another PVA glue that's supposed to be especially good for veneer work, but can also be used for joinery. I tried to make the test the same for each glue as I went along, and so I started out, I had this cherry plywood is what I used. I cut out a bunch of little squares of it, little sample boards or coupons, I guess you might call them. And for the first test, to make sure that I want to make sure I had the exact same amount of glue on each board for each test with each glue. And so I have a putty knife with teeth on it here for spreading glue. And so I put some glue on, and I took this putty knife and I scraped the glue back to get an even distribution of the glue across the board. And I did that with each of the samples, so I had the exact same amount of glue on each of the boards with each of the different kinds of glue. So anyway, like I said earlier, some of my results were unexpected and surprising. I'll tell you all about that in the end, and a few other surprising things that I'll show you at the end of the video. So, but here's how it went. So once I had all of the glue spread and all the start times labeled onto the test pieces, I just went around and around, back and forth with all of them. I take them apart in sequence. I take the Titebond original apart, and I put it back together. Then I pick the next one up, and I take it apart and put it back together. And I get to the end, I go back to the first one, and I do it again. Take it apart, put it back together. And I just kept on doing that. And once I got into the test, I did a little evaluation on tack. Some of these glues are very thin and kind of slimy, and they tend to, worm around a lot. And some of the glues have got a lot of tack, and it feels like the stuff just comes together like there's a magnet in there almost. And so I just, did I don't know, subjective, I suppose, evaluation as to how much tack each one of these had, and I recorded that as I went along. It took a while, but finally they started to fail one by one, and so I recorded the times on there, and just kept going until all of them had failed. I was really quite surprised by how long it took before these glues failed. I mean, all of them. Some of them were unbelievable, and but even the shortest open times by this test method were surprisingly long. So anyway, like I said a second ago, the results of the tests are a little surprising because the open times or working times that I got with this method were remarkably long. And the results that I got, actually, here's what they are. The number one most working time I got was with Unibond 1. That I got 50 minutes before it seemed like the glue was starting to fail. Next was Titebond 2 at 47 minutes, Elmer's Glue All 46 minutes, Titebond Cold Press 41 minutes, Titebond Original 38, Pro Glue 36, and on the bottom, you want to call it the bottom, Better Bond and Titebond 3 were both at 35 minutes. So, like I said, first of all, those are longer than I would have expected, and I think part of the reason for that is because using the putty knife with the teeth in it, I think that was probably an appropriate amount of glue for maybe veneering, but I think for regular joinery, it's probably more glue than I would normally use. So having what was probably a thicker application of the glue, that might explain the longer working times. The other thing that surprised me quite a bit is that the Titebond 3 performed so poorly, and not that 35 minutes is poor, but relative to the other ones, like Titebond 2 and the rest of them for that matter, but on their website they claim that Titebond 3 should have double the working time as Titebond 2 and original. And that's not at all, not even close to what I found here. So, and I should tell you something else too. I mentioned that I recorded what the relative tack were on these. And the glues that had the best tack, in my opinion, were Titebond Original and Better Bond, and then Unibond 1 also seemed to have a nice high tack. I would say Titebond is a little more, Better Bond and Unibond are probably closer, but it's relative. I only went high, medium, low. Medium tack, I had Titebond 2. It had a good tack, not as much as the first three I mentioned, and all the rest of them had a relatively low tack. So I thought as I recorded it, I'd let you know what I found. So anyway, I'm not satisfied with the results that I got here. So I'm thinking, well, I'm going to try something different. So I'm going to try taking more samples and doing the same thing, except when I put the glue on, I'm going to sort of butter it on there, and I'm going to clamp it, fairly tight, and see what happens then. And my reasoning the reason I want to do that is because, again, back to real world results. Well, a real world problem that I have is sometimes I'll be working on a project, I'll clamp things together, I'll be going along happily, and all of a sudden I think, oh, no. I put that on upside down, or I put that on in the wrong sequence or something, and I want to take it apart and do it over. And so I think it'd be nice to see how well the glues hold up and how much extra time you might have after they're clamped, see if you're able to work with them anymore. So that's what I'm going to do next. And I should also mention that I didn't just by accident, when I did this with the test, they were okay, they're not working. I just kind of set the pieces together, and I just, did this and set them aside. So when I came back the next day, well, every single one of these is glued together. So what I'm going to do at the end of the video is I'm going to do some destruction testing on these, and I'm going to try to get an evaluation that even at what looked like a failure point, see how much adhesion and how much strength I really did get in these samples. So anyway, I'll show you the clamping test right now. Well, I didn't expect this. The glue set up so fast that by the time I had all 8 of the samples clamped and went back to start testing them, that the first 5 had already failed by that point. So I had to retest those first 5 glues. But I'm not gonna show you all of the testing. You get the idea. Okay, well, I certainly did get a different result by clamping these than I did just laying the glue on and rubbing them around. They're much, much, much shorter. In fact, like I said a second ago, by the time I got all 8 samples clamped up, the first 5 of them, the glue had already failed before I got back and took the clamps off, and I was able to take them apart, but they wouldn't stick back together again. So I had to do those 5 over again. But okay, I got results, and no, these are not all the same. So let's see. Here's the results of the how much time that the glue was still workable after I clamped it and took it apart. So Tight Bond Original in this round was the best. It was 8 minutes after I put the first clamps on that it was still workable. Better Bond was at 7 minutes. Unibond 1 is 6. Tight Bond Cold Press was at 5. Elmer's Glue All was at 4. Pro Glue 3. And Tight Bond 2 and 3 are at the bottom. Tight Bond 3 again, 2 minutes. So that stuff, at least by this test, once you glue it, forget it. You're not going to be able to salvage that glue. You might be able to get it apart, but you'll have to put more glue on to make it work again. So as far as this round, those are the results I got. So what do I say? I'm still not satisfied. again, I think the results here are valid. It was a little more difficult a test to perform because it went so quickly, but still, they're not all the same, and I think that's a real-world observation about one of them has 8 minutes of working time by this method, and a couple of them have only got 2 minutes. So that does say something. But I think I'm missing something still. So I'm going to do one more round of testing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make this just as absolute real world as I can for working time. And so rather than using the putty knife to get glue on there, and rather than clamping them together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the samples and I'm going to just put some glue on there, and I'm going to butter it, because I personally like to see a little glue on each side of the joint when I'm putting together, if possible. So I'm going to make sure that there's glue coverage across both surfaces, and I'm going to rub them together, press them as tight as I can, the excess off, and set them aside. So it's should have less glue in between the board this way than I did with the putty knife, and I think that might be a little more real world of what happens in the workshop when we're gluing our projects together. So let's see how that one goes. So I know you've seen me perform basically the same test at least twice already, so I decided to just do a little time lapse so we can get on to the results a little faster. Okay, so before I get into the results of this last test, I want to let you know that the next thing after this is going to be the destruction testing, and that was a lot of fun. And immediately after that, I will give you my conclusions of all 3 of these tests combined, and what maybe will be some surprising glue recommendations at the end of the video here coming up soon, so I hope you stick around to hear that. Anyway, this last test, my conclusions for test number 3 for the open time on that, these times were all a little bit shorter than the first test, but certainly a lot longer than the second one. And the overall, the best open time for this third test was Elmer's glue. Old Elmer's glue all, 36 minutes. It was quite a bit ahead of the rest. Titebond Original and Better Bond were both 29, 28 minutes. Unibond was 25. Titebond 2, 23. Titebond 3, 21, and again, Titebond 3 is supposed to have more open time, but I'm just not seeing that in these tests. Titebond Cold Press was 21, and Pro Glue was 15 minutes. So quite a range of difference in working time across these different glues. So anyway, that's what I got on test number 3. Now let's get into the destruction testing. Wow. Well, that was fun. But what did I learn? Well, not much really, but there were a few things that came out through my destruction testing. The first set of samples I did, the ones where I used the glue spreader, actually had amazingly good glue strength on all of those samples, or most of them anyway, especially given that they were essentially failed, dried up already when I put them together, and that's all I did. I just put them together and set them aside. There was no clamping. So even at that though, most of the ones out of that sample had really good glue strength. The Better Bond, man, it was 100% wood failure, 0 glue failure on that sample. Tight Bond 2, same thing. Tight Bond Original, maybe about, I'd say 70% wood failure, 30% glue failure. Elmer's, not terribly good. Unibond, glue failure. Tight Bond 1. Tight Bond 3, I'd say about a 60% glue failure, 40% wood failure. So anyway, yeah, pretty impressive, and I'm not going to make any conclusions by it, but it was impressive to see that happened. In the second test, where I clamped the pieces together, pretty much 100% glue failure on all of those samples. There was less glue in the joint apparently, or whatever, but pretty much all of those were glue failures. In my third test, where I didn't use the spreader and I, buttered it on and had, I would think, a thinner layer of glue, again, I had almost 100% glue failure on all of the samples. The only exception to that is the Tight Bond Original. And I think it's the glue. I think it's the glue. I don't think it's the way I tested it. This stuff just got stickier and stickier and stickier as it dried. And so I don't think that was I don't think that's an anomaly. I think that's characteristic of this Tight Bond Original. So anyway, but beyond that, I'm not making any conclusions. I didn't intend to do a strength test, but I just stumbled across that and I thought it'd be fun to see what happens. As far as strength, really, if you're really concerned with strength, go back to the fine woodworking test that they did, and I'll have a link in the description to this article, because it really is quite good. Although I didn't get any I won't make any conclusions about the destruction tests. I will make a couple of conclusions about the working time tests. And what I did, I've compiled, I took all 3 times and I averaged them. All 3 of the tests, I averaged the times and I ranked them by which of these glues has the best working time. And Elmer's Glue All, probably the least expensive of all of these glues, has, from what I can tell, pretty consistently excellent working time. Excellent, I should say, for PVA glues. I'm talking more about that in a minute. So Elmer's Glue All, Unibond was very close. Tight Bond Original, again, Tight Bond Original is pretty impressive stuff. I would not hesitate to use that in any project, any indoor project, I'd say. Tight Bond 2, 24 minutes. Better Bond, 23. Tight Bond Cold Press, 22. Tight Bond 3, 19 minutes, and Pro Glue average of all 3 tests was 18 minutes. So the conclusions that I will make from this set of tests is that the original, less expensive PVA glues, Elmer's Glue All, Tight Bond 1, they're great. They're just great. Tight Bond 1 seems to have more tack. And overall, I would say Elmer's has got a little more working time, but they're both excellent, just excellent. Unibond 1, again, a very impressive glue. It is, however, quite a bit more expensive than the Elmer's or the Tight Bond. Now, I have a little bit more I want to tell you about, and that is that this is just my first round of tests. I'm not saying that this is the best overall glue to use. I am planning to do a test with veneer, how well these different glues will work with veneer. These 4 glues over here, the Better Bond, Unibond, Cold Press, and the Pro Glue, are all supposed to be better for veneer, and I think the primary selling point there is that they help prevent bleed through, to keep the vacuum from sucking the glue right through the veneer. So I want to do some testing on that. And at some point, I want to test these glues for bent laminations. Typically, I want to be careful how I say this. People use all kinds of different glues for all kinds of different things. But what I've always heard is that the best glue for bent laminations is a resin glue, something Unibond 800 or something comparable to that. However, 2 of these glues claim right on the bottle, it says that they're good, this is appropriate for bent laminations. The Pro Glue and the Unibond both say that. And on the Unibond website, it even says that this stuff is very good for bent laminations. It also says that the resin glue is a little better, but it says for most bent laminations that this will do the trick. So I want to try that out for myself and see how it compares. But now, the surprise that I want to mention, I know I tested all of these for PVA glues for open time, and the reason I chose PVA glues to test is partly because of the veneer question, and partly because these are the most common glues that we as woodworkers use. On the other hand, there are a couple other options. The next time I have a very complicated glue up, I think, and I haven't done it yet, but I've heard excellent things about it, I'm going to use Old Brown glue. This is liquid hide glue. It's hide glue blended with urea to make it liquid, and it stays liquid, it stays open for a long time. This is really good stuff. So, but again, it's more expensive and it's not as easy to come by. You won't get this at the big box stores. And another really good option if you really need a lot of working time, epoxy. And also the resin glues. The resin glues are slow. But again, all of those are more expensive. You need specialty stores to find them. And so that's why they were out of the scope of this test. But I do happen to know that those are good choices also. Oh, and I want to mention too that James King and Nick Ferry did a video that did a really nice overview of various different types of woodworking glues. And I have a link to their video in the description here. So, if you're still watching this, thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't even want to admit how much time I've got into this video. So if you're still watching, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.